Yeah, thanks for that introduction. Very quick further introduction, a little bit about me. So my background's in penetration testing. I was a pen tester for about 10 years before this. More recently, opened up a startup. If you want to know about them, go find us out in the lobby somewhere. And as will become a little bit relevant later on, many people might know me as just somebody that likes to stir a little bit of controversy on LinkedIn. You'll notice there's another name on the board as well. So that's Boo Smith or Bethany, who was the person that did most of the hard work on this. Unfortunately, she's just got a new job and she's enjoying her summer holiday, having just left university. So she wasn't able to make it. So I'm going to be taking all the credit. So first of all, I just want to preface this conversation by explaining a little bit about what the actual intentions behind the AppSec detection framework are and what they aren't. Because what I don't want to come across as is saying that I'm trying to bash any kind of a particular vendor or, in fact, endorse any kind of a particular vendor. All I'm really trying to do here is demystify what we've currently got in the dynamic and static application security testing space by providing some actionable, quantifiable information about how well particular scanners perform and how well they can compare against each other. So, pretty much all of the scanners that we've so far got in the AppSec detection framework are things that I've used for many years, things that I absolutely love using and have a real value. I just wanted to understand what their limitations actually are and to be able to say with some level of authority what they can and what they can't do. So this research really came about after I was trying to recruit a pen tester a few years ago. I built basically a platform where there were a number of different potential vulnerabilities that they could explore and they could identify. And then at the end of it, they do a bit of a show me, tell me exercise where they talk me through what they found, how they found it, and I could ask them a few questions. During that, there were some interesting candidates who, shall we say, used scanners a little bit more than necessarily they needed to, and started coming up with some very odd suggestions as to what the vulnerabilities were. They went on to a cross-site scripting one and started talking to me about things like HTTP headers or cookie vulnerabilities, and a lot of the conversation sounded a lot of the words they were using sounded very familiar to me, and I quickly figured out that actually what some of these people were doing was using scanners to really perform a lot of the testing on their behalf. Now, I don't really have an issue with people being able to do that. I think that in the modern day we really should be adopting tooling to automate as much of the job as we possibly can. But the thing that really stuck out to me was that a lot of these people weren't identifying vulnerabilities that I thought were kind of fundamental vulnerabilities to being able to test in application security. And in a lot of cases, they were vulnerabilities that I thought were quite easy to be able to find. Admittedly, I built the vulnerabilities into the system in the first place, so I was a little bit biased. But what I really thought I might do at that point is take some of the tools that were being used inside these tech tests, run them against what I built, and see how well they actually performed, see what their limitations were. So I started doing that, and I started posting the results on LinkedIn, and it got a little bit of traction. People seemed to be interested in it, and then some of the vendors that I was talking about got particularly interested in it and sent me some politely worded letters that effectively said words like desist and cease. So for a while that was interesting, but it kind of died a little bit of a death at that point, and it just sat there in the background as a research piece to probably never see the light of day again. Until Lancaster University reached out and said, we've got all of this opportunity for students to do research projects with people such as yourselves. Is there anything that you can think of that we could bring some students in to be able to work on and actually help deliver? And I thought, they've got a bigger legal team than I have, so maybe we can look at getting something like this up and off the ground again. So, as I mentioned before, we had Boo Smith, who did about 18, 19 weeks with us so far, but we're going to carry that research on as well. So this is going to be a collaboration piece between myself and the university for another 12 weeks, and then hopefully keep it going beyond then. And effectively, what we agreed was that we were going to design something a little bit more sort of professional, a little bit more precise than running a bunch of scanners against my recruitment rig. It seemed like there was a couple of options here. There was an easy mode where we take a bunch of existing vulnerable web apps, Juice Shop, DVWA, things like that, and we run scanning technologies against each of them and publish the results, effectively what I'd done in the LinkedIn controversy. Or there was a harder option, right? Build something more extensible, build something that was more matched towards an existing framework or taxonomy of vulnerabilities, something that could really get a complete coverage, so you could do proper gap analysis of what your tools were and weren't capable of performing against. And like I say, I wasn't doing the work, so obviously I chose to go with the hard mode. So the framework is mapped against two different taxonomies, and I use the word taxonomy reluctantly for the first one because OWASP themselves are fairly clear that the OWASP top 10 is not a complete list of top 10 of all of the vulnerability categories that there are out there, but we chose it because it is probably the most familiar, the most recognized source of categorizing vulnerabilities anywhere on the internet. And the other one was CWEs, common weaknesses and exposures. I put not CVE in capitals there because that's the first confusion that everybody has. So while CVE is about vulnerabilities in specific technology stacks, CWEs really talks more generally about the class of vulnerability. So if you can imagine a reflected cross-site scripting attack might be a CWE, whereas reflected cross-site scripting in jQuery is a CVE. One of the interesting things about CWE as a choice is that it does already have some information in it about the detection methods of different vulnerabilities, which I kind of hope solved the problem for us. But when you dig into it, the information there is a bit limited. It's not very transparent about what it means when it says you can detect this through SAST or you can detect this through manual testing. And in fact, half of the CWEs don't actually have any vulnerabilities mapped to them at all. But effectively, where we've started is by taking the 180 CWEs that are known to map to OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities, and we're trying to address those first, and then from there, we're going to extend it out beyond that to the thousands and thousands of CWEs that exist in the MITRE database. So how does ASDF actually work? Effectively, what it is a bunch of containerized micro applications. So if the CWE is for reflected cross-site scripting, then effectively all that app does is it's a deployed page where there is a single input field, the minimum amount of code possible to actually demonstrate reflected cross-site scripting. Same with file upload, same with cross-site request forgery, same with every single instance of a vulnerability that you might be trying to build a test for. And there's also effectively a management interface which is responsible for deploying these. So we've got, I think, 52 specific tests built so far, which cover more than 100 CWEs, because naturally some of them, if you're doing the CWE for cross-site scripting, then you're also doing one for reflected cross-site scripting. You kind of get more granular CWEs. But effectively, this is a framework to be able to deploy all of those, to be able to then point your various different tools at them, run the tools, and then record the results. Did the tool find on that particular URL the CWEs that were expected to be found or that were present? If so, yes, mark it as yes. If not, mark it as no. And what you end up with at the end of it is some fairly transparent results to say with some level of confidence that the tool does perform well with these particular classes of vulnerabilities and doesn't perform well with other classes of vulnerabilities. Now, we are working on a limited data set, so take everything that you see with a pinch of salt, I'll say, to hopefully avoid any of the cease and desists anymore. But what we found so far has been really, really insightful. So you can see on the left-hand side a breakdown, effectively a gap analysis of all of the different tools and the configurations for those tools that we've got so far. So we've basically been working through some vanilla configurations for some of the most popular tools on the market. Nuclei, which is a fan favourite amongst bug bounters, doesn't seem to have done particularly well across most of the OWASP top 10 categories. Burp Suite, probably the most well-known commercial off-the-shelf DAST scanner. They've done, I think they outperformed the other DAST scanners in the in the process. But you can still see right across, so at the bottom we've got SemGrep, which is a SAS tool. You can see right across the DAS tools, though, there are entire categories of the OWASP top 10 that so far these tools haven't been able to identify. Now, the argument from the vendors might be, you need to tune it, you need to configure it specific to your environment. If you get the right setups, you get the right policies, you get the right so on and so forth in place, then it will perform better. So I've actually reached out to them, and I've already got a lot of these vendors saying they're more than happy to tune their tools on my behalf, and then we can run it against the same framework again to be able to see if you had somebody who is an expert in this tool, let's see how well it performs in that instance. But it's also an opportunity for people inside the business to tune things in the way that they already have them, and then to be able to see how well they perform there. We just chose a kind of vanilla configuration at the moment because, to be honest with you, when I speak to AppSec engineers or even developers who are in a lot of these cases the people responsible for running these tools inside their pipelines, they're not spending hours or days researching exactly how to configure these things. They're hoping for a point-and-click solution that's able to find as many vulnerabilities as possible. The graph on the right-hand side is potentially a little bit more alarming, I think, in terms of the results. So effectively, what that's saying is that none of the scanners individually identify more than about 25% of the vulnerabilities that have been introduced. And these aren't complex, sophisticated vulnerabilities in a lot of cases. These are what I, as a pen tester, would typically call the low-hanging fruit. They're, the results of these surprised me quite a lot, because I'd kind of gone into this looking at the OWASP top 10 and looking at the CWEs and saying, tools probably can find about 75% of these, and in fact it's completely flipped that conception on its head. One of the other interesting things about presenting the data as it is on the left-hand side is, I know a lot of people try and layer their security tooling to try and ensure that they're getting that coverage, not necessarily relying on a single technology, but maybe they run SAST on their pull requests and then they run DAS during their deployments. But what we can see from the right-hand side as opposed to the left-hand side is, even if you've got something like Nuclei plus Burp Suite plus SemGrep, there's still potentially dozens and dozens of vulnerabilities that just simply cannot be detected through automated means. I think the graph here potentially even demonstrates that a little bit further. So if you layered all of the tools that you had so far, how big is the coverage across all of the OWASP top 10? And you can see there's some brilliant coverage on certain classes of vulnerability. But then there's other ones. I mean, there's a massive amount of that grey area which represents blind spots across the top 10. This is another view that's a little bit more granular in detail, and in fact I can actually bring up the application in a second. So if I go out to here, so effectively the idea here is that you can come in once you've run your scanner against your various different tool sets, or if the configurations already exist inside here, you can say I use SemGrep and I use that, for example. And then what it'll tell you off the back of this is how well each of them perform. And you can see that, improper output neutralization for logs, as it stands at the moment, as far as we've been able to tell from the basic test, and in fact there is only one test currently built in for this particular CWE, neither ZAP nor SemGrep is able to find that class of vulnerability at all. Same with omission of security-related relevant information. This gives you information that you can start to then feed into your pen tester or your procurement process or whatever it might be, that helps you decide where should you be focusing on at the moment to try and build out your detection capabilities, and where can you already rely on tools to be able to do a lot of that heavy lifting for you. So I've been really interested in various applications for this, what the actual purpose of this research is. From my perspective, it's just interesting to understand and demystify a lot of what these tools can do. But I like to think there's a lot of application for this, and there's a lot of reason why I'm hoping to be able to encourage other people to get involved in this and to contribute towards this, right? There's a lot of opportunity to understand the coverage gaps inside your business if you're a penetration tester or you're responsible for application security inside an organization. It's a good opportunity to evaluate tools, right? At the moment, we're dealing with vendor obfuscation of what their tools are actually capable of being able to do. But this allows you to actually compare apples to apples, right? This is a way to be able to say, actually, hang on, I ran your tool against this framework, and in doing so, I'm able to say confidently that it doesn't perform as well as X or Y in the market, which feeds on to the commercial applications, which is what I'm really hoping to do. Is these vendors who've said they're more than happy to run the tools in their configurations against my framework, I'd like to now be able to go to them and have a conversation and say, look, here are all of the vulnerabilities that you can't currently reliably find. What are you doing about that? You know, what can we do? Can we collaborate? Can we work together towards being able to actually improve your detection capabilities? And that's widened by the fact that these tests can be run against particular technology stacks. These tests can be run against particular implementations of a vulnerability, so I can start to be much, much more granular and say, look, you can find cross-site scripting in ASP applications, but you cannot find cross-site scripting in PHP applications or something like that. And it really opens up the potential for these vendors to actually not just say we find more vulnerabilities than everybody else, but to actually be incentivized to find a wider breadth of vulnerabilities as well. What I'm also hoping that it does, more than anything, is just tell me what we can reliably actually use tools for, right? Like I said at the start, I'm a massive, massive advocate for being able to use security tools and scanners to be able to speed up your process. I will love it the day where I'm interviewing somebody, they run a scanner and it finds every single vulnerability just because they know exactly how to use that tool, how to get the most out of it. And then I can just ask them and have a conversation off the back of it just to make sure that they're able to offer the consultancy on top of that. They're able to offer the advice and the guidance that you need to be able to support developers through the remediation of it. But in order to do that, we need to be able to understand the tools and their limitations and where I need that person to still be an expert in the finding of the vulnerabilities. I'm really actually looking forward to, if anybody knows any, testing this against some of the more modern AI-powered scanners as well, because I'm fascinated to know how something like that performs against a framework like this. So if anybody afterwards knows about any of those, really, really invite you to let me know. I'd love to get this framework going against that. The other thing worth talking about in terms of this framework, where we're at the moment, is there is still a significant amount of work left to do. So I built a few utilities into it that if anybody is interested in contributing, will basically tell you which of the CWEs are not covered yet, so that you've got an idea about what tests are worth building and prioritizing first. And you can see from this, there's a pretty large number of CWEs still left outstanding. So there's 88 with tests at the moment. Like I said, it's about 50 tests, and it's about 88 CWEs that those 50 tests actually demonstrate. But there's 102 just mapped to the OWASP top 10 still to do, and that's hopefully what I'll get Lancaster to do, but also what I invite anybody here who's interested in contributing to do as well. The other thing that I invite people to do is to run your existing tool sets against this and then commit it back in. This is an open source project. This is something that anybody from within the community can say, actually, I like this tool. I'd like to show off its capabilities, or I use this tool on a day-to-day. I'd like to understand and drive it towards being a more effective version of itself. You effectively can take even the tools that we've already got, run your own particular configurations and policies and so on and so forth against it, commit those back in, and then what we've all got available to us at that point is a framework to be able to understand and drive these tools towards a greater success. As I say, it's an open source framework. Anybody's absolutely free to come in, download it. You can run it with a couple of commands to be able to get the web interface and have a play with the results we've already got. The main thing that I'm really hoping for, like I say, is the contribution towards building those tests and running those scans at the moment. But I invite everybody to to use it, to give some feedback, and hopefully we'll be able to build something that actually drives AppSec tooling forward into the future. So I think I've got a bit of time left. I speedrun that a little bit because I'm conscious I'm competing with lunch at the moment. But any questions? Sure. So, in terms of how, So, in terms of how this research has shifted my mindset and how we actually approach penetration testing, I think one of the things that was always a reality, at least from my approach, is I never really trusted tools particularly well. I assumed they could find a bunch of things, and it was great if they did, but I always found myself validating those results manually to be able to actually complement them. I hope that it could find a bunch of stuff before I even get going, so I don't have to write up a noddy finding for HTTP security headers or something like that. But it certainly opened my eyes that actually we're not getting a lot closer, or at least it doesn't appear we're getting a lot closer to a world where we can rely on these tools without a manual tester on top of it. Certainly not for certain types of changes, at least, right? There are particular changes that an application development team might be able to make now that we can reliably use these tools to be able to scan, and in the pipeline is absolutely an option. But it's highlighted that for the majority of vulnerabilities, there is still a place at the moment for penetration testing to step in, and there's still a need in order for them to be able to understand if risks have been introduced or not. Now, we don't do pen testing ourselves, so scoping is not necessarily a thing that I used to be a pen tester for many years, but in terms of your second question about how it's influenced the scoping process, I guess what's really useful is being able to help customers understand, or the person responsible for application security, being able to help them understand why there is a need to go beyond scanning technologies. Things like SAST are a brilliant tool to be wielded to be able to help developers understand vulnerabilities and catch them sooner, because the sooner you find a vulnerability, the cheaper it typically is to be able to fix it. But it's an opportunity to be able to help and say to them, look, you're missing a trick here. There's still lots and lots of things that you need to start thinking about, how you're going to be able to address that, whether you're going to bring an internal pen tester in, an external pen tester, whether you're going to introduce controls that mean you can mitigate these vulnerabilities upstream. Like as much as people bash on WAFs, bypass techniques are getting harder and harder, and WAFs are able to mitigate more and more of these classes of vulnerabilities. And there's other, RASP and other technologies now that we can start to adopt. And I'm hoping that's an extensible opportunity for this as well, to be able to say, actually, with those technologies in place, does the detection capability go down? Are we able to mitigate a lot of these vulnerabilities, or are we in fact still in the same place that we were 5 or 10 years ago, as it feels a little bit like we might be still in DAST and SAS technology?
So I noticed your choice of scanners there, but I don't know whether you've done research on it or not, but are any of the kind of the more well-known kind of vulnerability scanner vendors within your analysis?
So at the moment, the scanning vendors that the scanning technologies that we've got are just SemGrep, which I have actually also run the free version of Sneak. I've just not had the opportunity to load the results into it as well. Zap is probably the most adopted inside internal teams. It's I think one of the top 10 most downloaded projects on the whole of GitHub. So it's very, very popular inside businesses, although not necessarily quite so popular amongst security vendors themselves, who I think Burp Suite is the most popular. And actually, speaking to Portswigger, their online the online DAST solution is really more commercialized. My understanding is the detection capabilities of that are pretty much the same as the detection capabilities of the local tool used by pen testers. Nuclei is absolutely the most popular scanning technology used amongst bug bounty hunters at the moment, but I am very much keen to be able to start adding in more and more technologies as time goes on. I guess a question might be, are there particular technologies that people would like to see? What do people consider to be relevant? And I'm open to, like I say, people contributing their own access to scanners as they have them. Obviously, I can try and get commercial engagement to be able to contribute towards this and say, yeah, you can have a license to be able to run this framework against a particular tool or not. But if I don't necessarily get that buy-in from the business, and I'm kind of relying on people in the community who have those tools to be able to do it on my behalf. Any other questions?
You mentioned you suspect about 75% hit rate. It'd be interesting to hear an example of a vulnerability that you really expected to be picked up that it really struggled.
Sure. So yeah, I mentioned a 75% hit rate because I'd gone through the I'd gone through the OAuth top 10 and those 180 vulnerabilities. I just said yes, no to whether I thought, just based on kind of a gut feel, whether I thought tools would be able to find it. I think this is kind of something that you can detect through signatures, and this is something where there's likely to be work into it. And I found that lots and lots of tools really focus pretty much, almost, not necessarily entirely, but quite clearly, quite heavily on this sort of A03, which is injection vulnerabilities, right, which is an area that you would absolutely expect a lot of these tools to be able to find, like cross-site scripting, SQL injection, things of that nature. Where I was more surprised, to your question of the vulnerabilities that they weren't able to find, a lot of information disclosure. So there's a lot of really, again, what I consider to be quite trivial to find vulnerabilities in there, where there's a .env file in the root directory, for example, with clear passwords and other data within it. These kinds of things that are default configurations in a lot of software stacks. And a lot of the tools just didn't seem to be showing those up. Another one, certain tools did, what was quite interesting was they flagged things like cross-site request forgery unreliably. So there's a few different tests for cross-site request forgery on there. And sometimes they'll say it's present, sometimes it's not, which really surprised me because fundamentally these are just single pages with a simple form that you have a submission button for, and there's no reason why you should be able to find it in one and not in another, as far as I can tell. So it took me back to find that they didn't highlight a lot of those. Similar with click-jacking vulnerabilities as well. There was a lot of inconsistency for that, which is, I think, fundamentally one of the easiest vulnerabilities to be able to reliably and consistently, like when I imagine how you might build a technology to be able to find that, it's fascinating to me that some of these scanners weren't able to. Any other questions? Okay, no worries. Well, come find me if you've got any other questions.